This newscast is brought to you by Qberg, Pittsburgh's source for LGBTQ plus news and community information. To learn more about Qberg, check out their website at qberg.com. That's QBURGH.com. From the PEP Radio Newsroom, these are the stories we are covering at this hour. Housing and Urban Development Secretary Scott Turner has told the HUD to stop enforcing a rule that bans discrimination against LGBTQ plus people in some housing and shelter programs administered by the department, saying that banning such discrimination is far-left gender ideology and that God wants the HUD to stop enforcing the rule. We at this agency are carrying out the mission laid out by President Trump on January 20th when he signed an executive order to restore biological truth to the federal government, Turner said in a statement last week. This means recognizing there are only two sexes, male and female. It means getting government out of the way of what the Lord established from the beginning when he created man in his own image. The policy is about the 2012 Equal Access Rule, which bans discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and marital status in housing programs and shelters that receive federal money. It was expanded in 2016 to allow trans people to be housed with their gender rather than their sex assigned at birth, which can be a roadblock to to accessing transitional and emergency housing, since trans women can face violence and discrimination when housed with men. The rule was repeatedly attacked in Donald Trump's first term by then HUD Secretary Ben Carson, who took several years to promulgate rules to allow homeless shelters to only accept people on the basis of their sex assigned at birth. Carson himself repeatedly insulted transgender people. The HUD then released a guide for homeless shelters to help them spot trans women, which included instructing homeless shelters to look for Adam's apples and women who are tall. In 2021, former President Joe Biden's HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge withdrew the rules changes from the Trump administration and re-implemented the Equal Access Rule from the Obama administration. Unfortunately, transgender and gender nonconforming people report more instances of housing instability and homelessness than cisgender people, she noted at the time. Now, Secretary Turner says that the HUD will halt any pending future enforcement actions related to HUD's 2016 Equal Access Rule, which in essence tied housing programs, shelters, and other facilities by HUD to far-left gender ideology. And what this means is that trans people will have to be housed with their sex assigned at birth. This means that many homeless trans people will effectively not have access to HUD-funded programs and shelters. Out Representative Becca Balint, the Democrat from Vermont, said that she is no longer surprised about how low the Trump administration are willing to go. Frankly, I'm not surprised either. The Trump administration would rather let people die in the streets than protect those in greatest need. To our Trump voting listeners, I ask you, how's the price of eggs where you live? With all that's happening at HUD, it's difficult to imagine any other government agencies are suffering quite as much. And then we remember USAID. Oh, USAID. The Trump administration's dismantlement of USAID, the United States' primary source of foreign aid since President Kennedy established the agency in 1961, is devastating the LGBTQ plus community around the globe, recipients report. It is a catastrophe. Mark Bromley, chair of the Council for Global Equality, told the Washington Blade. Bromley estimates that the U.S. funds roughly a third of the global LGBTQ plus rights movement, as Elon Musk's so-called Department of Government Efficiency guts the department. A 90-day freeze on all foreign aid has thrown USAID's HIV treatment and prevention efforts, diplomatic battles against LGBTQ plus discrimination, and advocacy for transgender people into utter chaos. The effect on PEPFAR, the President's emergency plan for AIDS relief, is the most egregious example of the administration's draconian approach to slashing U.S. foreign assistance. On Monday, the head of the UN AIDS agency said the number of new HIV infections could jump more than 6 times. By 2029, American support for PEPFAR is dropped. UN AIDS Executive Director Winnie Byanyima warned that millions could die and more resistant strains of the disease could emerge as a result. PEPFAR has contributed to a 60% decline in HIV infections since the virus peaked in 1995, but that progress is at risk following the freeze. Officials estimate that by 2029, there could be 8.7 million new infections and a tenfold jump in AIDS-related deaths without continued funding, Bianyima told the Los Angeles Times. As a consequence, an additional 3.4 million children could be made orphans. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced an exemption to the funding freeze for life-saving programs in January, but said the onus was on aid recipients to apply for it, despite the fact that those organizations' contacts at USAID have been cut off from communicating with them or they've been fired. Rubio questioned the competence of groups unable to navigate the funding freeze. The list of LGBTQ plus organizations and programs affected by the freeze imposed as DOGE and administration officials assess all aid recipients' contributions to Trump's version of the national interest is long. The Institute on Race, Equality, and Human Rights, a Washington-based group advocating for LGBTQ plus and intersex rights in Latin America, lost nearly 80% of its funding and announced a suspension in all of its programming. Outright International, a global LGBTQ and intersex advocacy organization, has halted assistance to LGBTQ plus groups in more than 32 countries in Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and Latin America. The LGBTQ plus Victory Institute lost $600,000, about two-thirds of its global program budget, which it uses to support groups like Vote LGBT in Brazil and Caribe Afirmativo in Colombia. Funding for Equal Namibia and Namibia Pride was gutted, setting back efforts to fight a new anti-same-sex marriage act passed in October. The Center for Integrated Training and Research, which fights the HIV/AIDS epidemic in the Dominican Republic, said free services that they provide, including urology, internal medicine, and pediatric services, are suspended indefinitely. Replacing funds no longer available after USAID's demise will be challenging, if not impossible, said the Council for Global Equality's chair, Bromley. That's a quick check of the news at this hour, and I gotta tell you, it is getting more and more dismal by the day. Be sure to check out the PEP Radio website for further details as news develops. Be sure to download the Live 365 app to be able to take PEP Radio with you wherever you go. If you happen to be watching us over on YouTube, click the subscribe button so that we know that you're following along, and we appreciate that. And again, that's the news at this hour. Let's now get back to more music here on PEP Radio.